I want every one of you to be clear about the fundamentals, the core orbits of developing what we can right now say a genius mindset. One is, of course, language, rather the main tool of genius in function in society. The number one tool is language. Okay, perhaps the only one tool is language, and uh, if language is the core invariant at a functional level, then the variants are your expressions, your responses, your ways of activities, your ways of doing things, then your ways of relating with people, whether your colleagues or your subordinates or your seniors or even strangers or to your family members, and then that perfect clarity about the conceptual frameworks of violin, and some understanding about trapping mindsets. These are the topics, basic topics. So once that is clarified, a little bit of exercises or assignments were done on creative analytical thinking during our discussions on the parables. Then perhaps during your presentations on the nursery rhyme Jack and Jill, um, as I just recollect. Then, mm, uh, yeah, of course, extended discussions on the parables of the master thief, master woodcutter and master cook. Mm. Then all of you made presentations. It was the second time you made presentations on your learnings, which itself is a kind of a recollecting of what you have experienced or what you have done. Every one of you to be absolutely clear about language. That means the concept sense of every word, every critical word, the referent of every critical word or keyword, the referent reality of every keyword at orbit at one stage. At the second stage, the referent of every idea, every sentence, critical sentence, the referent reality of every critical sentence or paragraph, and reconceptualizing your perceptions, your observations on the reference. That part is somewhat done, maybe around 60%. Wherein this just another perspective applied to any reference or anything. Everything is a variant because everything is subject to variation. So every word, okay, every word has a concept which you sense it. Okay, you have to sense the concept. That is possible mainly by looking into the meanings. That's how you develop the concept of sensitivity. When you do that at least about 10, 12 times, you will develop concept sensitivity. That you may recur maybe when you write something or when you enter into deeper discussions with something, or whenever you want to develop some idea to write a book or something like that. In fact, I envisage a time in the future when every one of you will write and publish a book. Minimum one book, which I am sure ideas will come to you, and uh, I want you to make an impeccable work. So, uh, so that is a property of the word. Then every word is nothing but a name of something. Something. It could be an object, visible. It could be a phenomenon. It could be an event or whatever, and etc. And they could be sensible, that means accessible to your sensing, or it could be definitely insensible, or it could be something that is imagined or projected. Imagined like a phoenix or dragon or fairy tales or imagining a future proposal. Okay. Here also, you have to look at this from a violin perspective. This word here is the invariant. Word meanings or variations or variants. Concept sense is again trying to control the variance and get a clear invariant picture of whatever is named by that word. That to get an invariant perception of that something which we call the referent. The referent, whatever is really referred to by the word. Originally somebody saw whatever is there and he or she or they have given a name to that. Because language itself is a huge system. These names and meanings and concepts are usually available. So thereby language has achieved what the linguists call functional autonomy. That's a term. Functional autonomy meaning you can almost talk about anything in the world, past, present, or future, just by words. That property of the language is called functional autonomy. That was possible because, like some other systems created by a human being, language, because they begin by its original linkages with the reference, hmm, reference, and somebody sitting there, some genius is sitting there, developed a whole lot of naming of almost everything in the world. And when every word can name something, you can just go on talking about those names. Thereby, language achieving the so-called functional autonomy. Someone makes a statement to you and that person is vanished, but the emotions evoked by that may continue. That is called the functional autonomy. The language is independently functioning. Autonomy meaning, no, autonomy meaning self-governing capacity. That language, somebody told you that you are an idiot girl, I don't want to meet you again. Just like that. The statement is done at time one and that person has vanished and that person forgot what she told you, in fact. But because of the functional autonomic functioning of that registered sentence in your mind, it goes on functioning, inducing feelings and emotions and other things. Why do we discuss this? When you are aware of this, you should apply your power of attention to get rid of this and cancel this out. That's why we discuss this. We should not be victims of the functional autonomy of just a language, just a sentence uttered by somebody, whoever it is. That's why we discuss. Looking at language from a violin perspective, the word remains an invariant. Okay, the word. What is the basis of this? A statement made by somebody an hour back or a day back. Okay. That invariant is just sustaining this variation in the mind, this variant in the mind. And it is a variant. This is a variant because it can vary. It will automatically vary. This depression will not exist 3 days later or 3 years later, let us say so. You have changed the context, therefore I am explaining that. Okay. So you can tell them that this is a variant. This variant, according to you, this variant is operating in that person because this variant of depression linkaged with that invariant of such a statement that you are a stupid fellow, it has been conditioned so many years back. Okay. That's what you said. So therefore you use the word assumption, right?
Yes, yes.
Assumption meaning if someone tells you like that, point number one, that person dislikes you. Point number two, you are made guilty of some allegation. Huh? Point number three, you did not expect this from that person. For example, so all these variants are working in that person. You can explain to that person. If you are taking a hypothetical case, you have brought in a hypothetical case, but you use the concept assumption. What did you say? When we were talking about word as an invariant, okay? Word is an invariant because every word, as I said, the pen or I
Yeah.
dislike word, it's an invariant. Any word in any language remains invariant, but its
Yes.
meanings can be varied. Meanings are subject to variation because
Yes.
of the comprehension power or whatever of the individuals involved. Okay.
Yes.
That's why
Yeah.
meanings are varied. Even
Yes.
dictionary gives an average 5 meanings to every word. Now, but the concept sense
Yes.
you understand. That is not a common topic. Concept sense is for your understanding. I mean you. In order to be clear about a word. Right now, we are talking about this from a perspective of you are getting control over referent reality perception at a higher level. I told in the beginning that the core is nothing but a referent reality perception. That is all. When you say mystic is the one who sees the truth, that perception of truth is the only requirement, whatsoever be the variations of situations or episodes or experiences. But the referent reality perception, we covered only one aspect through the language.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this referred reality itself is to be discussed. So we are discussing the details of a referred reality. That
Okay. So in
is
addition to language, the other aspects we are discussing now.
not in addition. You should not look at it that way.
Uh,
Yeah, if you use that word. Basically, once again, let us say the entire program is about making you competent in referent reality perception only. Okay. Referent reality perception has a different meaning that was clarified by the concept of word, meanings, concept sense, referent and referent reality. So that you will have referent reality perception. It is just a word, it's a framework. What is referent reality perception? If someone talks about, let us say, the sword in the master cook, the sword used by the master cook in his fight, that sword, the word sword has a meaning. The sword has a certain concept. When you hear the word sword, there's a concept sense for that, okay, being an object. So that particular sword which was in the hand of Tosortsu is the real referent of the referent there in the context of master cook.
yes.
We cannot see that. We can only have a projection. We can only have a projection, what you call projection. That means you can have only an imagination of
Yes.
that particular sword which was stolen by the cook. We can never see that. All right.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And though we will never be able to see that particular sword stolen by the cook or that particular sword which was kept as a great possession by the master samurai. 3. That particular sword which was gifted to him, I mean the master samurai by the emperor. 4. That sword which was made by a master craftsman according to the orders of a king. 5. That sword which was made by the master craftsman as an act of meditation. Everywhere I am talking about the linkage again, because our discussion itself is progressing in a network, not called in a linkage analysis perspective. For example, look at that sword. I mean, that particular sword. Which sword?
Okay.
The sword taken by the master cook from the master samurai. Do you see the violin of that sword? Let us do a violin analysis of that sword. No, the sword word has its meaning. Okay. meaning. Okay. Sword has its concept sense. What is the concept sense of sword, for example, Anuradha?
It is a weapon that is used
Yeah,
to
it is
kill.
some kind of a so-called weapon or some kind of a material, an object which can be used as a weapon. All right.
Mm.
You can further say it has a certain shape, a certain design, certain qualities or properties made with iron, etc., etc. Okay.
Yeah.
When you talk about the concept sense will look more or less like the description of what? Description of the
Word sword.
no concept sense. Of course, it is clarification of the word sword. But when you really describe the concept sense, it will look as if it is a description of the
Sword.
exactly because it would look like that. But there is another possibility that you will describe the details of the referent of the sword, which itself can be done from a violin perspective. No, that particular sword of the master samurai, that sword. What do you see how it gets linkaged to various realities? See the history of that sword. If you look at the history of that sword, that is a referent reality. That's a very violin analysis of the referent and the referent reality of that sword. Once again, a referent reality perspective is from the language point of view, because you are always given the language, Anuradha. We cannot go and live with the master cook and live throughout as a silent witness of entire parable. Okay, you are given as 2 pages of words and sentences, the parable of the master cook. How will you read the parable of the master cook and see? I mean, you cannot see directly. How will you visualize? How will you imagine? How will you project what happened uh, in that entire sequence of the parable of the master cook? Get the point? There only comes referent perception and referent reality perception. Now, whereas violin is just another aspect. Violin is what? It is connected to referent reality perception because violin because violin is the total possible probable reality of any referent. Got it?
Yes.
Reality. Reality would include from its very historical beginning to the current state to even the future, which we will project on one side huh, of its existence or its original orbit of properties, like what is a sword, right? Right? At its original orbit, what are the properties of a sword? For example, it has a so-called handle, so-called material part. It is made of a certain matter. Okay, it has been shaped. One third of it is very sharp, other side is blunt, and so many properties. That is the physical violin. that can be a consideration for somebody who wants to create a new weapon or somebody who wants to do a research on swords. But in the context of the parable, look at the violin of the history of that sword. Where did it originate? I mean, the 0 points. Where did that particular sword of the samurai originated? Come on. Now let us have some dialogues. Where did that? Now look. Now let us do violin of one of the three angles to look at that particular sword. Remember. Come on, do it.
It was gifted by the emperor.
That was the origin of that sword.
No.
The blacksmith or whoever made it,
That was the origin of the sword.
or the
No. The
iron,
thought to
the
gift it
yeah, yeah.
in the mind of the emperor.
Thought to gift it or thought to make a sword.
Make a
Thought to
sword.
Make the sword by
The
the
thought to design such a
the
weapon.
real look at the real rudimentary origin of that sword. See that rudimentary origin of that sword, like the rudimentary origin of the universe, that rudimentary origin of the human being, that rudimentary origin of every human being, including that human beings you sit there. That was in the love of two individuals. We can go to that level.
Need for
We come
survival.
what?
To protect oneself or defend oneself.
Which one? Sword or rudimentary origin of sword?
Yeah.
No, that is about sword in general. Good, Andratha, that you are doing a concept sense perspective of sword. Here we are talking about a specific sword mentioned in the parable of the master cook. That particular sword is stolen by the cook. The origin of that sword was a particular moment of truth in the mind of the emperor, that he would, when he thought of visiting that samurai of that master monastery, that when I go there, I have to gift him something. And the most ideal gift to a samurai must be a sword. He may have many other swords, no doubt, but I am the emperor, and if I give, whether any people have given a gift or not, whether he has so many swords or not, I would give a gift of a sword. That was the invariant origin of that sword. You have to look at like this. That is the genius choice of your understanding everything in the world. If you extend it laterally, there is a similar rudimentary origin for every assumption, every belief, every attitude, every behavior, every expression, every way of doing things, every relationship, every moment of every human being also. You have to come to that level later. That's why we discuss this in this context, okay? All right. So then, if you look at the detailed invariant analysis, so the real invariant of that let us say Master Cook sword, let us say MCS, was a moment of truth. A moment of truth meaning moment of decision of the emperor. Once again, to make your logics a little bit satisfied, to come with me in this discussion is that For every item in this universe, there is a similar invariant variant linkage network. That is why, including the very you that is sitting there, including every thought that is going on in your mind. That is why. And here we are taking a convenient, comfortable example because we know somewhat the origin and the destiny of that particular sword. That's all. Okay? Is that clear, Anuradha? All right. So there was a moment of something in the mind of the emperor, and that again, see, that was not about the sword. Actually, it was to make a visit to the monastery. These are all very important. Getting it, Parvati? Yeah. Sorry to use some silly examples. I will not continue to do this example. That man went to a house maybe to visit visit some person. But when he visited that person's house, that person was not there, but his wife was there. Now I don't want to continue. All right. Now the emperor actually thought of making a visit to the monastery only. Okay, because he is visiting the monastery, because he is an emperor, because his self-image is coming into play. The invariant is linkage with that also. We are talking again invariant meaning the origin of that sword. Invariant here is the origin, the real origin point of that sword of the master cook. I mean the sword stolen by the master cook. So then that invariant self-image of the king, emperor suggests him that when he is visiting a monastery of a master samurai, the ideal master gift is a sword. Here I can linkage it with Anuradha's point of assumption. Okay? I wonder why you use the word assumption there. Anyway, that when you go there, you must give a gift because you are an emperor or you are a friend. So when you go to a friend's house after a long time, or when you are visiting him for the birthday of the child, you think of buying a gift. That is why that particular object in a particular shop was purchased by you, Parvati. Get the point? Otherwise, that object would have been sitting there for another 1 week, or somebody else would have purchased. We don't know. We are talking about that particular gift you purchased to give to the child of your friend. So it was in the conceptualization of the emperor, the invariant origin of that sword. Now the sword maker, the genius craftsman, the genius blacksmith. Okay, in this particular case of a sword, there is another invariant is operating. What is that invariant controlling his activity of making the sword? Yeah. What invariant he is keeping in the mind when he is making that sword?
That it is a sword.
Yeah, that's all because we are not talking about making a face sword, Anuradha. We are talking about the making of that particular sword. That you have to keep in the invariant of your mind setting when you are discussing something. You see, variant is operating everywhere. Like when you hear a question, that question should remain as an invariant in your mind, which must control your thought process, your conceptualization, etc., etc. Then it is a fitting answer to the question.
Sir, I agree with you, sir. Sir, I agree with you. But even if it is a great sword, it is first, it is initially, it's a sword ultimately. Even though you want to make an ideal sword, that
That
the
is a
emperor has
that's a
requested.
that's a very journalistic observation point of view. You have to look at the internal process of the maker. That is an impassionate researcher statement. You made a sword. But the sword maker will never agree that I just made a sword, no doubt about that. We are talking about the invariant situation in the mind of the craftsman when he was making a sword for the emperor. You have to see the referent of the emperor. You have to see the referent reality of the emperor. We are not comfortable. Let us say, what you call, what is that? Our Narendra Modi is writing an email to you. Till that point, you may never have even thought about Narendra Modi. But when he makes an email to you, he is the head of the second largest nation in the world. Then things are different. So similarly, it is an emperor. Perhaps we may not have even the mindset about an emperor because we are not familiar with emperors. You have only heard stories about emperors. You have heard only stories about kings. Let's say. So yeah, that sword maker had an invariant framework in the mind that I am making a sword for the emperor. How many swordsmen, so how many craftsmen in the country would get an opportunity to make a sword for the emperor, Aniratha, for example? So inevitably it will be there. No? So even friendship, even a good friend, no? Why do you go to a good friend to get an advice? Because he is likely to give you the finest thought, suggestion. You will not go to anybody. So that's applicable everywhere. So there is an invariant perception happening in all cases. For example, if somebody on the road calls you an idiot, you may not feel that much. But if your close friend calls you, I mean genuinely, they may call you jokingly an idiot, very seriously, implying what he means, then that achieves another invariant force. That is why you go on feeling about it, you know. And therefore, all the further variants of his activities, that's all activities are also variant activities. Because variants of activities like preparing the ore, what you call heating it and then hammering it and folding it and rehammering it and all that, they are all variants. Why they are all variants, Parvati?
Because, yeah, again, the intentionality to make the greatest sword for the emperor vis-a-vis a normal sword he makes, the actions may differ.
Exactly. That is one dimension of variance. And that activity itself is a variant because some other swordsman, some other craftsman will be doing the same thing in a slightly varied way. But to the contest, that's a variant because at this time, when he is applying the hammer, when he is choosing the ores, when he is making it, there is that ultimate concern. Therefore, that hammering of that particular sword, that hammering applied on that sword is a variant, a better variant of a similar making.
But if he is a master sword maker, irrespective of emperor or a normal person, his sword will be
And
the
that is
sword every time, isn't it?
that's a theoretical statement which you can make always, no doubt about that. No
No,
doubt about that.
even in practical situations,
Hmm.
even in organizations, if you see an employee who is good at something, irrespective of who gives him or her a task, he will do the same way.
That's a different story. That's a different context you're talking about. Yes, of course. That's yeah. That should be ideally, of course. Everyone must do every act from the invariant level of his commitment and dedication to the work and to the organization, or at least to that linkage with the invariant of oneself. That whatever I do, I will do it in the finest way. Yes, of course. Yeah. That is in a different context. That is a different context, Parvati. Now here we are talking about making of a thing. Even in the normal making, for example, items manufactured for the military companies a different quality standard. Okay, the airplane made for the president is of a different quality standard because only president can afford that. That is why. Boeing or Airbus cannot make that kind of a plane for commercial use at all. Okay.
True.
So the making is different. We are talking about the making of an object because the objects are variants, whereas mindsets can remain invariant. Yes, of course. Certain mindset which exist as invariant in one person can be easily a variant in another person. We will go to such a differential examples once we complete this. A sample variant invariant analysis that we are doing now. Okay. Yeah. Because there are different kinds of iron ores available, iron ores of that quality.
Correct.
Most of the swordsmen may not be able to afford that. Okay. And when the emperor is telling, when you as an observer, you may say that you will do the finest work. Perhaps let us say you as a leader, you would be doing in an impeccable way. But one day the CEO comes and tells you the same thing which you do every day. You may be doing the same thing, no doubt, but there will be different mindset operating. That's what we are talking. At the example you gave. Because if you are not sensitive to the CEO, then your system is not that capable, that's all. I don't mean to say that if you are doing something for CEO, you will do it correct and complete, and if you are doing it for a colleague, you will not do so. No. You may be doing the same thing. But the mindset when you do that will be very different. And that mindset matters above all. Because your mindset for your child and mindset about another child. Okay, mindset makes the ultimate difference of human beings. Okay, the mindset about deities, the mindset about husband, the mindset about father, the mindset about the country, mindset about yourself, and so on and so forth. That mindset only governs you, not the competencies alone. For example, if you're participating in a music competition, uh, and on that day, you will try to choose the finest possible song. This you might have sung during one of the auditions or one of the trials. But at that moment of singing and the final stage, there's a different mindset definitely operating. By that, there may not be any variations in the pitch or sangadis, exact sangadis, but the mindset is different. If the mindset was not different, you will not enjoy the prize also. So he has chosen the finest variant of action. Okay. And he must have collected, uh, he must have prepared his mindsets properly. And then, because it is an object, he must have collected the finest iron ores. Okay. He must have used uh, uh, the proper heating, proper melting, proper remelting, proper folding, proper refolding, etc., etc. There are a lot of actions in the making of a sword, especially of a samurai sword. It takes an average 6 to 7 months to make a samurai sword normally, but I don't know, because the emperor has ordered, he must have done it much more faster. Much more faster, for example. That can be an additional variable. Yeah. For example. Now, so many linkages. So these ores are from different places. You can collect it. Okay. So he might do it with a some kind of a puja or something like that, because he cannot repeat that making. This is an object being made. It's not an article being written which you can easily delete and edit it and replace it. I don't know whether you know about the pujas being done by those who make huge objects like molding and all that. Molding a 10-ton bell or a 100-kilogram weight of a ceremonial lamp and all that. They just cannot make it in a very ordinary way. They do a lot of pujas generally, because once this alloys are molten and a mold is made, and it's very heavy and it is lifted onto that and all that. If that mindset is not proper, the thing may not happen properly. So many variant invariant linkage network are operating there with the sword maker. So emperor was to visit the samurai. Emperor is concerned about his self-image. Emperor wants to give a recognition to the samurai. So at least one or two, three linkages are operating there. And now the sword. That sword has been there in the monastery for a long time, doing nothing. Every day, perhaps the samurai might have taken it and cleaned it and kept it back in its case. Now, we talk about the invariant of a sword, and now comes variant, invariant. And variants only get connected. Invariant got connected with the making of the variant. And that variant has its primary property of intentionality. That means having intents. What is the intent of a sword? If the sword was alive, what is the purpose of a sword coming into existence?
To kill.
Yeah. Not to kill.
To make
To cut.
the person who holds it win.
Not that either. To cut. That's all. That is the primary. That is the intentionality of the sword. To cut. That's all. The intent of the intent of now that sword has achieved, let us say, the power of fire. The intent of the fire, that it generates expansion of molecules or whatever that is called heat. But you use that fire maybe to injure somebody. Similarly, the intent of the sword is just to tuck, divide or cut, inflict a rupture in whichever surface it hits. But the intent to kill, like Parvati said, it is with the person who uses it. So, the purpose or the intent by which, or the intent, and that could have been an intent. That intent must have had linkages with the sword maker also. Because that intentionality of the sword god that achieved that intentionality because of the intent of its creator. Rather, the creator's intent got transmitted into the created thing. When I say this, there should be several parallel questions inside you. For example, if you are a sword, so that we will come later. I just gave a rudiment of the seed of an invariant idea in you. That is, if you are a sword,
So does this mean that even if I myself do not have the intentionality to cut, I can create that intentionality in something or someone else?
don't take cut.
Uh,
Like the sword has its properties, varied properties. The human sword has varied properties. The sharpness of thinking, the sharpness of attention, the sharpness of perception, the sharpness of reflection, the sharpness of conceptualization, the sharpness of analysis, the sharpness of imagination, etc. How these swords are used, that depends upon the intent of the you. So we will come to that later, little later. If you are a sword. Now, the power of intent of the sword maker was apparently such that we can even say that entire story of the master cook was, or entire destiny of the master cook was sort of induced by the force of that intent. How can you say no to that? Or you are making that interpretation. The entire destiny uh, of the master cook was sort of determined by the intent of the craftsman. Why not? How can you say no to that? How can anybody in the world say no to this? I want to know. In this parable, we will uh, we can go to the reality of the human being. That we will do later. Because an object has its integrity because it's an object. A sharp sword is a sharp sword is a sharp sword. But the sharp thinking of so-called human beings, which sword of the human being is sharp? By its formation itself? No. Every human being has the responsibility to make every engine, every equipment, every tool, every competence to be as sharp as the sword, as sharp as possible, which they don't do. What is missing? What makes people so confident and maybe despondent to think that I am at the top of everything and I don't have the time and mood to work for it, and they're quite happy in their given state and continue to manage their organic condition till they die? That's what most people are doing. Somehow to get an employment, then got the money. Now somehow may save money, construct house, get the children married, and nothing. I'm not telling it's wrong. No, no, no. I'm talking about genius choices in life, which somebody makes. Apparently, here I want, or I envisage the genius choices in every one of you to become a real mystic at the level of which the greatest mystics you can think of. Why not? Whoever it is. But your understanding about the greatest mystics should not be biased by the available stories. The greatest human beings, Krishna as a human being, Shiva as a human being, Parvati as a human being, Saraswati as a human being, Buddha as a human being, Jesus as a human being, which they were. They never claimed even a trace that they are somebody different from other human beings at all. Only the mediocre majority is praising them because the mediocrity can never even make a in the imaginations of competencies of sharpness anywhere near the Buddha or the Krishna or the Jesus. Therefore, their only salvation is to project them as gods and go on worshipping them till the end of their life, doing nothing. Perhaps doing contrary to whatever the Buddha or Jesus or Krishna existed for. That's all different stories. So, I want you to look at this film of understanding the sword from the variant, invariant, orbit, linkage, intentionality network of the craftsman. Or the emperor. Ideally, let us say the craftsman. The 100% clear intent. For whatever reason, he was so much dedicated and so much sincere and so much concentrated in his intentionality, as with the concentrated intent of making a sword. Intentionality he has because he is experienced. Okay, as Anuradha, like you have the intentionality to do mural painting because you have that background. Now it's a matter of your intent to make another mural or not. Get the difference, all right? Yeah. So other day we investigated the concept sense of intent, concentrated mind and will and attention on something. So that master craftsman, for having the ultimate power of intentionality, ultimate competency to make a sword, when he made the sword, his power of intent was such that it must be a worthy creation to be gifted to the emperor. There is a linkage with what Parvati said also, Parvati. Because that craftsman must be very possibly aware that the king may never use that sword. Because king definitely would not tell the craftsman that you make a good sword, because king doesn't have to say that. The emperor does not have to say that. I, as the emperor, tell you to make a sword to be gifted to the master. He doesn't have to say that, because the intentionality of the emperor has that power. So the intent of the master craftsman, the entire story of the master cook, let us say, rather the destiny of the master cook was basically driven by the intent of the sword in one way, and the sword achieved that intent because it was made out of the intent of a master craftsman.
Can we also say because of that intentionality, the master cook was actually saved?
So, have a moment of projection, have a moment of meditation or reflection. Yeah. Why it is not writing? Yeah. Why? Amaya? Yeah. Yeah, right. Have a moment of reflection. Do you see, again coming back, do you see the referent of a craftsman sitting there and making the sword? craftsman making a sword. I have reflected upon referent of stationary singular objects like pen or pencil or anything. Can you reflect on the referent of a craftsman making a sword? It is a series of activities, okay? Or at least a fortnight. Unlike the referent of a sword, which will be limited within the range of expressions of the sword, the referent of sword making will extend, let us say, minimum 14 days. So, a series of activities. All right? You have to see that. You have to spend a few moments reflecting on his activities. Do you see a craftsman? Do you see him collecting the ores? Do you see him melting the ores? Do you see him making the first shape, the second shape, the third shape, remelting it, and so on and so forth? Why should you see is because in every moment that intent is operating. It is not that like the normal cook in a normal stupid hotel, the tea kettle is not even properly washed. Some stupid water is poured in, some stupid tea is and finally when the cup is given, it is given very solemnly. No. In a perfect tea making, every step involved in tea making must be done with the same intentionality, beginning with washing the vessel. Not just when you just offer the final cup of tea to the customer. No. That's what is happening most of the time. So, if it's a proper intent, that intent should be driving every movement, every step of activity involved in the process. Because sword making is a process. It involves several steps of activities. So, in all those moments of every step, every process of making the sword, that very intent was constantly guiding. Therefore, the intent of that sword, of that particular sword, what could be the intent of a sword? Can a sword have intent? If you understand intent, a sword has intent, or which one?
Intentionality.
Exactly, intentionality. As I told you, a crystal ball placed on an inclined plane assumes an intentionality. Given a chance, now it is sort of gummed onto the paper. As soon as the gum weakens, the ball will definitely roll down. So sword has that perfect intentionality, like a pen has, like a what you call, like a chair we talked about. Intentionality is the property of the thing. Intentionality is the property of the setting. The vessel kept on top of the stove, a burning stove, you don't have to do anything. No human being can do anything. Fire under the kettle, it will get heated. It will get heated. That heating itself cannot be done by anybody in the world. They all depend upon the intent properties of intentionalities of the fire and intentionality of the setting. Fire is here, and if the kettle is here, the water will not get boiled. Setting meaning that kettle should be precisely on top of the stove. Human being just arranges the setting, that's all. Heating of the water happens by the intentionality of the things involved. So that sword has an ultimately clear intentionality, perfect intentionality. The intentionality of the experience of the swordsman transferred into the sword. Like the sincerity we talked about, that genuine concern of the therapist doing the wonder upon every word she uses, every language she uses towards the other person. In every home, actually, every parent is telling children to study, be good boy, be good boy, be good girl. Even a criminal is telling only good ideas to the children, no doubt about that. But it doesn't work because the intentionality of the parents are totally different. They just do all kinds of nonsenses whenever they get a chance, and by some assumptions, like Anuradha pointed out, they talk some so-called good ideas to the children. That won't work. Because those words may be registered in the minds of the child, do not have intentionality. That is why. They're just like people say, Satyameva Jayade. So, because of the intentionality of the sword is powerful. But here, in this particular case, very surprisingly, some intent of that craftsman must have worked. We are talking at the mysterious height of the possible explanation to the parable. There could be possibly a moment of uh, sadness, a moment of doubt in the mind of that master craftsman. Oh, I do this with all my flesh, blood, and bone, with all my heart, with all my intent, and with all my intentionality. But if this sword is going to be kept inside the, what is the name of the cover of the sword? Sheath, yeah. If the sword is going to be just inside a sheath and kept in a corner of the palace of the emperor, then why? So there could be a question. There must have been moments. That particular moment of sadness must have had its intent also. Why not? That's the way you, the genius or the poetic genius of you must consider this.